Alright, I need to get my act together because there are so many games coming out this year that I know I want to talk about, and I really cannot afford to get lazy. Like this month we've already had Hogwarts, Atomic Heart, and Sons of the Forest, and those were 3 games on my most anticipated list, none of which I've made any videos on. So here are my thoughts on Hogwarts Legacy. I know they're late, so I'll try to keep them brief. I'm wanting to focus on a few of the larger parts of the game and things that I thought were important to people who haven't played it yet, and hopefully you find this entertaining if you have played it. So let's just jump right in. So on one hand, Hogwarts Legacy is a great Harry Potter game, but on the other hand, it's one of the most bare bones and embarrassing RPGs I've ever played. But first, let's talk about the good and why it's a great Harry Potter game. Everyone knows it by now, but this is the best recreation of Hogwarts that we could have hoped for, and as a Harry Potter fan, I had a genuine emotional reaction when I first flew around the castle at night on my broom. It's just so surreal to see such a historic place be so well realized and look so beautiful at the same time, and then be able to go and fully explore what is essentially a maze of detailed rooms and corridors on the inside. It's really something special. Hogsmeade has also been faithfully adapted, but I feel not as well as Hogwarts. Obviously, Hogwarts just steals the entire show. So Hogwarts itself is an incredible feat of achievement, and the castle alone satiated my thirst for nostalgia. But what else makes this a great Harry Potter game? Well, for me, the open world actually does a great job, partly due to how well the time period is pulled off, but mainly due to the hamlets, as the developers called them, essentially the settlements or towns scattered around the map. While the NPCs in this game aren't very engaging or reactive, they do play a part, as well as other details of the open world, to make these hamlets fun to explore, and the atmosphere and environment surrounding these do a good job at transporting me to the Harry Potter universe. As well as other open world details, I just feel like Hogwarts, Hogsmeade, and everything in between, whether it's Hogsmeade Station or Hagrid's Hut, did a great job at making the world feel kind of homey, and I think if you've seen the movies, you'll know that that's a pretty important feeling to have. And then the last big detail I wanted to touch on that makes this feel like a great Harry Potter game is the combat. Everyone is praising the combat, and for good reason. It's incredibly intuitive and fun to play around with. It holds a nice challenge to it as well though, so it's not just mind-numbing. Even if you have the smooth brain curse build equipped, you'll still have to dodge and time things correctly. A couple really cool details in the combat is one, the ability to throw barrels and things at targets with the press of a button. Not only is this super satisfying, but it's also really smart to not stop the momentum of the player to have them try and pull this off in any other way. Instead, just give them a prompt, have them press that corresponding key, and watch the object go flying into the enemy with ease. There's also cool moves you can pull off with certain enemy types, so for example, you can slam spiders' heads into the ground when they rear their heads up to attack, or hang frogs up by their tongues, or turn an animagus back into their human form, all with the spell that would make the most sense for that action. I'd also love to give a shout out to sound design within combat. It's a minor thing to some people, but the sound of the unforgivable curses, for example, are so loud and powerful, but they have the impact that you'd expect them to have. This is also the case for dark magic, which also carries a heavy oomph to every attack. Dark magic also has a nice place in combat too. It's easy to pull off, like throwing things, and balanced well enough with the dark magic meter needing to be filled up to actually perform the attacks. But the other spells sound great too. Even the basic attack is pretty faithful to the sound heard in the films. Other than that though, I really just like the flow of combat. Once it starts, it doesn't slow down. Even though your spells are on cooldown, there are many ways around this, and everything just kind of fits. So yeah, it's really great that I can finally feel like an overpowered wizard in the Harry Potter game, so thumbs up. But Hogwarts Legacy is a terrible RPG, and I know that might piss some people off, so let me explain. When I think of an RPG, there are 2 systems that I think of. The first is deep progression systems with lots of choice, endgame content, in-depth gear systems, and replayability. And the second is a branching story path and character choices and dialogue options that impact the game, characters, and world. Hogwarts Legacy doesn't succeed very much in so many of these aspects. First of all, as far as I could tell, and I've seen this complaint on social media as well, the dialogue options and choices you make as a character don't have much impact on the outcome of quests or characters, and definitely not on the game world. Yes, there are a few different endings, including a bad ending, but they only amount to a cutscene and that's it. Having played through The Witcher 3 in the last year, this shit just doesn't fly. You know, I want my choices to impact how the story, how the questline, and potentially even how the world and its characters play out. And it's easy to become detached from the story when I can't impact it very heavily. I'm not too fussed about this, as in most games the story doesn't play a huge role in my enjoyment, but we're at a point now in gaming where if you're going to do an open world RPG, then there are so many other games out there that have probably done it better than you, and a super linear storyline like this in an RPG just doesn't cut it for me. Moving on, however, we have the bulk of my issues with this game that exist primarily in the gear system, skill tree, and overall progression progression and endgame content. First, let's tackle leveling up. The only way to level up in Hogwarts Legacy is by completing field guide challenges. Completing activities laid out in the field guide give you exactly the right amount of XP to reach level 40, and then level progression stops. Any combat, field guide page, Merlin trial, or anything else that you perform after completing the field guide challenges does not help progression in any sort of way. Yes, of course, you can complete your collections, but we don't care about meaningless collectibles right now. I will continue to argue that almost infinite progression is an incredible way to provide incentive for replayability. It's incredibly disheartening for me to know that engaging in open world activities won't progress me in any meaningful way now. I will say I like that the game encourages you to do different things, and I think the field guide is actually a really rewarding progression system, but after you hit max it just stops. Adding something else here would have been fantastic. I'll always respect the Borderlands franchise's way of tackling this issue with the badass ranks. They give you account-wide percentage increases of stats no matter what level you are or what part of the game you're up to. Anyway, leveling up will obviously give you skill points that you can put into a variety of skills, but there's a huge problem with this skill tree. There's almost no room for different builds or variety in where you choose to put your points. Everyone will ultimately be funneled into using the same broken curse build because there's nothing else to spec into. RPGs are about choice and what you choose to become, but this skill tree doesn't provide you with any room for that choice. And of course, somehow game developers continue to go backwards in not allowing you to respec where you put your points. How blind to player choice do you have to be to not put this option in? I don't think any player respects or admires the decision of not allowing you to respec. This is just such an out of touch thing. So the skill tree and leveling system limits replayability, but those systems aren't even my biggest gripe with the progression in this game. The gear system is an absolute joke. Already it's an insult to RPGs to have the main stats on your pieces of gear be called offense and defense. Now, before I critique even more, I will say that yes, you can upgrade your gear, and yes, you can apply different traits to boost certain actions in combat, but this system is just done averagely, I think. The upgrade system is super simple with only 3 tiers, but the traits you can apply will have you thinking briefly about which type of damage you want to do more of, although there is a trait that increases all types of damage. I'm not super happy with this system, but it isn't abysmal, so we can move on. What is abysmal is how you acquire gear. There are all these different caves around the map that you puzzle your way into, and then you get one piece of gear from it. Then you have to go back to the room of requirement and then identify it, and then it might not even be that good, and you got to do this with all the caves to quote unquote grind gear. And it's just a super counterintuitive game loop. If they were smart, they would have allowed you to grind out multiple pieces of gear and accessories from combat arenas, but you can't even get gear from combat arenas, only cosmetics. This would have been such a good way to have people grind for the high rolled stats or rare pieces of gear, but nope. Instead, we have offense, defense, and an average upgrade system. This is made even worse by the fact that combat is so good. Like, you have this incredible combat system, but you don't add anything to the combat arenas to make them replayable more than once. Now, even if you wanted to grind out getting the best gear, there wouldn't be any crazy endgame challenges to use it in. By that time, you've completed everything there is to do in the game, and there isn't any point in having the best gear. And the hardest difficulty isn't even that hard, so. The only endgame challenge in this game is finishing your collections, and while I am somewhat of a completionist, I also value my time enough to know that sitting down for multiple hours with a YouTube video or guide on my second monitor just to look for all the little unmarked things on the map to complete my collections isn't something that sounds enjoyable to me. It's a shame, really, because the leveling system, gear system, and skill tree do nothing to add to the replayability of the game. Once you've completed them, there's nothing else meaningful to do. Anyway, that's all I really wanted to say. There are so many more positives to this game and so many more negatives to this game as well, but I wanted to put some focus on a few of the larger ones, and as I said in the beginning, I ultimately enjoyed my time with it, but it struggled to keep my attention with systems that weren't really rewarding or had logic that just didn't work in an enticing game loop. Anyway, subscribe, follow me on Twitter, on Twitch. I hope this helped people who haven't bought the game yet and entertained people that have. Anyway, have a great day and see you later.